So, after several weeks of speculation, it has been reported that Moose looks to be staying with Impact Wrestling. That's right. Is reportedly thought to be staying with the company and just may have already signed a new deal with Impact Wrestling. It's a really big story, and it's something that, to be honest, it is surprising. I've got to be honest. I can't hide from it. When I did the videos previously talking about Moose, his future with Impact Wrestling, did I expect him to stay? Did I expect him to leave? It's out there, isn't it? And I'm more than happy to say that I was wrong. I'm more than happy to eat a slice of humble pie because it looks like Moose is staying. I felt personally, given the recent developments when it comes to Moose, physically, in terms of his in-ring work, in terms of his promos, all of it, I felt that it was almost inevitable, to be honest. And looking at recent history of people that have left Impact Wrestling, when their contract gets wound down and down and down and down, and eventually they either go to WWE or they go to AEW. And I thought it would be no different when it came to Moose, but it looks like Impact Wrestling, after re-signing Jordan Grace, which again for them was a huge re-signing, looks like they've managed to pull it off once more because it looks like Moose is staying with the company. Now, Moose, of course, made it very clear that his Impact Wrestling contract is up next month in June. He posted a tweet a couple of weeks ago saying that it was one of his big aims to win the Unified Impact World Championship before his contract expires in June. It had been widely discussed as well, certainly online on various websites. Various journalists had spoken openly that Moose's contract did expire in June of this year, and he was yet to re-sign with the company. Now, he's been with the company since 2016, and as I mentioned, given his radical improvements of his in terms of his physique, in terms of his ability in the ring, on the microphone, all that kind of stuff, and his background in the NFL, there was a general consensus of WWE, they're going to be interested. They've been sniffing around a lot of Impact Wrestling talents. AEW as well would certainly be interested in someone with the pedigree of Moose. It felt inevitable that Moose would go to another company once his contract expired. Now, it was followed after he posted the tweet talking about his contract expiring in June and hopefully winning the Impact World Championship before then. This was followed by Moose winning the main event at Impact Under Siege, where he became the #1 contender for the Impact World Championship. Now, I theorized, and I think quite a few people did as well, that this would lead to a match versus Kenny Omega, which it will. Against all odds has been the announcement that it was going to be Moose versus Kenny Omega, and I felt they were going to do an angle where essentially it was title versus career, and that Kenny Omega would retain, Moose would lose, and Moose would be written off of Impact Wrestling television. Wouldn't necessarily mean that he would leave Impact Wrestling, but would just write him off for the foreseeable future while they get the contract situation sorted out. But it looks like it's already been sorted out because it's been reported in the Wrestling Observer newsletter today by Dave Meltzer that the current thinking in Impact Wrestling is that Moose isn't going to be leaving Impact Wrestling anytime soon. And in fact, the feeling, and again, this is according to Dave Meltzer in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, the feeling is that Moose may have already signed a new contract with Impact Wrestling. This is what the quote says in the Observer. Quote, right now, it looks like Moose is either close to agreeing to sign a new deal or has done so. And that changes the dynamic of Omega versus Moose from when it would be Moose's last big match in the company. So Omega versus Moose could be at Slammiversary. Now, I think on top of that, what is certainly interesting is the news that we spoke about previously when it comes to the latest set of Impact Wrestling television tapings, in that it was a 4-day TV taping, but Kenny Omega and Don Callis, who we now know are just AEW contracted talents when we talk about Don Callis, but Kenny Omega and Don Callis were only at 1 day of the last set of Impact Wrestling television tapings. Now, reportedly, Impact Wrestling didn't need them for the final 3 days of shooting. Now, it's unclear, obviously, how long Kenny Omega is going to hold the Impact World Championship, but I think a lot of people, myself included, said, well, if Moose does re-sign with the company, Moose is the guy. Moose is the guy to win the World Championship. The only reason I was pitching other names, and I did do a video talking about names that could defeat Kenny Omega for the World Championship. Moose was one of those names. I lent towards other names like a Josh Alexander or someone like that just because I felt they were going to be around longer than Moose, but now that doesn't necessarily look like that. So if Moose has indeed re-signed with the company, I can very much now see, especially with Eddie Edwards going down with an injury, obviously with appendicitis, we don't know how long he's going to be out for. He has had surgery. That can mean he's out for 4 to 6 weeks, maybe a bit longer. That puts his status for Slammiversary very firmly up in the air. We don't know what's going on with that right now. given that the general feeling is that Moose is staying, he's very close or has already signed a new contract with Impact, that would lead me to say, okay, the main event of Slammiversary has to be Kenny Omega versus Moose. Does that mean that it feels inevitable that would be the case, considering that, as I mentioned, that Moose is arguably, is he the top star in the company right now? He's very close. He's very close. There's no doubt about that in my mind. He's very, very close. And I've said this before, and I don't mean this to repeat myself, far from it, but if Moose was going to stay, it was very obvious that he would be the one, wouldn't he, to beat Kenny Omega for that World Championship. Now, it does obviously raise the question, what happens with Against All Odds now? Does Moose and versus Kenny Omega, does that happen at Against All Odds? Do they have the match and then they do some kind of a screwy finish? I think the fact that Kenny Omega and Don Callis were only at the TV tapings for one day, I mean, obviously they could have got everything Kenny Omega-centric done in one day. That's a possibility. I mean, might have had Kenny Omega just do all of his promos, all of his vignettes, maybe his matches, and maybe his match against Moose at Against All Odds. Of course, Against All Odds was taped at the most recent set of Impact Wrestling television tapings, so that's a possibility that they had the match there. But I think things have changed. I think things radically changed, and I think just the overall image of what is going on now when it comes to the Impact World Championship changes with Moose re-signing. If you look at the roster now, with Moose being someone that you know is going to stick around for certainly the foreseeable future if he signs a new deal, if you look at the people available to Impact Wrestling to defeat Kenny Omega, it's only Moose. Moose is the guy to do it. And I've mentioned about his improvements over the course of the last 12 months. They've been radical. They've been absolutely radical. This is a guy that when he came in, if you compare Moose to when he came into Impact Wrestling in 2016, he's almost a different person at this point. You know, physically, the guy is obviously in the best shape of his life. Very apparent, and just the overall presentation now of everything he does, the entrance that he has is the best entrance in Impact Wrestling by far. The lights out, the music, the spotlight, the slow walk to the ring. His in-ring work is, it improved exponentially. And sometimes you tend to find that with people with an athletic background is because of the competitive nature or because of just the sheer natural athleticism that they have. Eventually, once it does click, then they just go to another level, and it's kind of we're seeing that with Moose. I mean, I'll tell the story once again. I know I've told it time and time again here on the channel, but when Moose was added to that 6-man main event at Hard to Kill in January, I was disappointed because the match that we were expecting to get was Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers versus, obviously, we're going to get Rich Swann and the Motor City Machine Guns. That, to me, given all 6 workers in that match, was going to be a really, really enjoyable main event. Now, obviously, Alex Shelley couldn't compete in that main event because he's a frontline worker, and the place that he works, the practice that he works in, changed the rules in terms of integrating with people regarding vaccinations and all that kind of stuff. It changed. So Alex Shelley, it was out of his hands. He couldn't compete at that Impact Wrestling event, and we haven't seen him on television since when it comes to Impact Wrestling. And they said, right, we're going to put Moose in. And it felt like at the time that he was kind of shoehorned into the spot, and it didn't really feel natural. We knew that we were going to get Moose versus Rich Swann in the future because we just had, I think the week prior, we'd had the Genesis Impact Plus event where Moose had defeated Willie Mack in that I Quit match, and as part of the agreement to winning that match, Rich Swann had agreed to give Moose a shot at the Impact World Championship. So we knew that we were going to get Moose versus Rich Swann, but it kind of felt a little bit shoehorned in there, and it didn't really fit the story, and obviously that wasn't the plan because Moose was feuding with Willie Mack at the time, and I mean, the videos are probably there again of me going, you know what, I just don't know if Moose is really up to this. It's going to be a big challenge for him. I think it makes the match worse because Alex Shelley's just that good and all this kind of stuff. And again, a slice of humble pie. Moose just continuously makes me eat this slice of humble pie. But once again, coming out of that Hard to Kill pay-per-view, in a match that contained the likes of Kenny Omega and Rich Swann and the Good Brothers, I was looking at that match going, the biggest star in that match coming out of it was Moose. He was the most impressive performance in the entirety of that match. Whether it's hitting Spanish flies off the top rope, whether it's just leapfrogs, athleticism, he just felt like a massive, massive star. And it was one of the first times that I seen this guy wrestle, and I just went, you know what, that guy is just, he can be something really, really special. And obviously, given his age, I think he's 37, 38 years of age right now. Again, this all factors in why I thought he was going to go to to WWE and why he was going to go to WWE or AEW was because he's starting to get into those peak years as a pro wrestler, 37, 38. That's where you start to you hope to get your big contracts around this kind of age. And he'd been in the business for a while. Obviously, prior to coming to Impact, he was in Ring of Honor. He'd been in Impact Wrestling for 5 years, which, to be honest, in terms of recent history, not a lot of people stick around in Impact for 5 years. It's a couple of years, then they'll go to another promotion like a WWE or an AEW or something like that. They use the company as a stepping stone. Just all of the things were pointing that he was going to go to WWE or AEW, and I still have no doubts. And again, I don't know. This is just speculation on my point, and I know that obviously there are some things in Moose's past as well that might that people have said that is a reason why WWE wouldn't be interested. I mean, I've said the spiel about WWE not caring about negative PR before, and they don't. I know this week we've seen 2 controversial figures released by WWE in the Velveteen Dream and Drake Wuertz. So you can say, oh, they don't care about negative PR. I mean, first of all, it was budget cuts, and then it made the cut very easy. I still think WWE would be willing to overlook that when it comes to someone like Moose because of his background as an NFL player, because of, again, his athleticism, his physique, all that kind of stuff. WWE, no doubt in my mind, looked at Moose and said money. And I don't know. I really don't know if he had discussions with WWE or not. I don't know if AEW reached out or not. I would find it very difficult to believe that they hadn't, unless the message came out from Moose himself, or for people that were representing Moose, or whoever came out and said, look, he ain't interested. He just wants a better contract in Impact Wrestling. He likes it there. He's comfortable there. He feels like he's a big star there. He hasn't achieved everything he wants to achieve there. He hasn't been a world champion. He hasn't had a sustained run at the top. And maybe that's how Moose looks at it. Maybe he looks at it saying, look, am I going to sign a really, really long-term deal with Impact? Probably not. But maybe a 2-year deal. And in that 2 years, for the majority of the time, not all the time, but for a large period there, I'm going to be the world champion. And I can still do outside bookings. I can still maybe go to work in Japan if I want to. I can maybe even work with AEW if I want to. It depends how desperate Impact Wrestling was to keep the guy around. And I think that's important to think as well. Just because he's re-signed or he's very close to re-signing, it doesn't necessarily mean he's re-signed for the same terms that he had before. He may have, obviously, I would assume he's probably got himself a better contract, more leeway for outside dates and all that kind of stuff. And maybe, I know assurances of winning the World Championship don't really exist in the world of pro wrestling, but maybe there has been an indication of, look, you're going to be the guy to beat Kenny Omega. And like I've said before, when it comes to choosing that star to beat Kenny Omega, that's a really big spot, because we know Kenny Omega's not going to be around in Impact Wrestling forever. He just isn't. He's an AEW star. This is an AEW and Impact Wrestling working relationship. Kenny Omega being the world champion for Impact Wrestling is an angle. It's a story. There is a beginning, there is a middle, and there's an end. And the end, we don't know where it's coming. I felt that it was coming at Bound for Glory in October. That's still a possibility, but now Slammiversary, I think, it opens the door for Kenny Omega to drop it there. Previously, and I still kind of believe this to a point, previously I said that I felt that Kenny Omega would hold on to the Impact World Championship as long as he was the AEW World Champion. Why? Well, the logic there was that AEW doesn't want to see Kenny Omega losing cleanly, or even losing in general, to guys from, a smaller company. And I know some people in Impact and some Impact fans will get upset by that, but that is the perception, and that is the wider perception of wrestling fans that don't like Impact Wrestling. The perception would be that, why is Kenny Omega putting over these guys in Impact Wrestling? That doesn't look good for Kenny Omega. That doesn't look good for the AEW World Champion. They protect the AEW World Champion on AEW television by not getting pinned or not putting people over, so why would he go to another company, and why would he put over their stars? It's old school pro wrestling stuff, I know, and it's kind of the stuff that you kind of hope doesn't exist in the world of wrestling today, but it still does. Promotions have to protect their stars. So I felt that for the entirety that Kenny Omega was the AEW World Champion, he would be the Impact World Champion as well. Once he lost the AEW World Championship, he wasn't as bulletproof anymore, and AEW wouldn't have these issues of, oh, do we really want to have our World Champion doing jobs to Impact guys and all that kind of stuff? Does that really look good on us? Does that make our champion less believable? Is that putting over Impact as a stronger promotion than AEW? All that kind of corporate politicking that does exist in the world of pro wrestling. Once Kenny Omega isn't the AEW World Champion, that makes all of that a lot easier. So I felt that as long as Kenny Omega was the AEW World Champion, he would hold on to the Impact World Championship. So because of that, I'm looking at the AEW pay-per-view calendar and how things would work with AEW. I went, well, when's Kenny Omega realistically going to drop the AEW World Championship? Because that's the key for when he drops the Impact World Championship. Is it going to happen like Double or Nothing? Looking at his opponents in Pac and Orange Cassidy, I would say no. I think that's unlikely, because I can't see both of them, either one of them, becoming the AEW World Champion. Not right now. So when next after that? Now, it could happen on a special edition of Dynamite or something like that. That's a possibility, right? But looking at pay-per-views, the next pay-per-view would be All Out. That's at the end of August, start of September. That one would be a possibility. That would mean that Kenny Omega by that point would have been the AEW World Champion for around 9 months or so. That's a good reign for a title reign in AEW. He could possibly drop the World Championship then. Okay, so if he drops the World Championship, say at the start of September, that means that the following month, October, that's Bound for Glory. He wouldn't be the AEW World Champion right there. He would then be just the Unified Impact World Champion. And then the main event of Bound for Glory, which is Impact's biggest show of the year traditionally. I know Slammiversary last year was a bigger show than Bound for Glory, but traditionally Bound for Glory is Impact Wrestling's WrestleMania. All of that would make sense for Kenny Omega to drop the title then at Bound for Glory. The only thing I will say about that now is I think Moose is probably the only star on the Impact Wrestling roster that maybe AEW wouldn't have a massive problem if he beat Kenny Omega. Now, I still do think they would probably want some bells and whistles on that one, AEW, to be honest. I still think they might have a slight issue I think they would have a slight issue still in their world champion putting over someone clean from Impact, but maybe that's part of the agreement. I don't know. It depends how they can work things out and how precious AEW is. Could Moose face Kenny Omega at Slammiversary and beat him for the World Championship now that Moose is re-signed, or at least that he's very close to, or he's considering staying, or whatever the story is? The answer is yes. He absolutely could beat Kenny Omega for the World Championship at Slammiversary. Do I expect Moose to beat Kenny Omega at Against All Odds? No. Do I think the match will happen? I don't know. I could see the match kind of happening, maybe a screwy finish. I could still see the stipulation whereby Moose faces Kenny Omega. They make it a title versus career match, and then Moose goes, and then somehow, a bit like an invading outside force, he manages to get another match against Kenny Omega where it's, again, title versus career, but this time he would have to retire or something like that. I could see them doing something like that, final opportunity, and then Moose maybe wins, and in that moment, you're crowning him as the big star in Impact Wrestling. That's a possibility as well. So I think with Moose possibly re-signing again, it's not fully confirmed, but the expectation is that he is going to re-sign. I think it opens the door for possibly Moose to defeat Kenny Omega at Slammiversary. It's a really interesting time, but after re-signing Jordan Grace and now re-signing Moose, that's two massive names for Impact Wrestling that they have re-signed that I think a lot of people, myself included, didn't expect Impact Wrestling to re-sign. So you have to give them credit in a really competitive market at the moment where people like WWE are reaching out to Impact Wrestling talents, where talents in the past have gone from Impact to AEW. Impact Wrestling has been able to sign two of its top talents, and that's a massive deal for Impact Wrestling. That sends a message to the rest of the roster saying, look, if you like it here, and if you do want to improve your money or whatever, we can do that. We can do that. Believe in the vision, believe in the brand. So very exciting and a very good news for Impact Wrestling. Now, one more thing I did want to talk about briefly before we wrap this up was the announcement that Kojima is coming to Impact Wrestling beginning next week. This was something we briefly spoke about the other day, because Tommy Dreamer noted that more New Japan talent was headed to Impact Wrestling. Former two-time IWGP Heavyweight Champion and two-time All Japan Triple Crown Heavyweight Champion Satoshi Kojima will be making his Impact Wrestling debut next week. He will be the fourth star from New Japan Pro Wrestling. David Finlay, Juice Robinson, and El Phantasmo, who is part of this crossover between New Japan Pro Wrestling and Impact. Now, Kojima, of course, he's a legend in any promotion he's ever competed in. Kojima has seen his fair share of historic accolades, including being the first wrestler to hold New Japan Pro Wrestling's IWGP Heavyweight Championship and All Japan Pro Wrestling's Triple Crown Heavyweight Championship simultaneously. Also, he is one of only 3 stars to have held the IWGP Heavyweight Triple Crown and NWA World Heavyweight Championships concurrently. His opponent next week has not been revealed at this time, so obviously massive story and massive scoop for Impact. Kojima still looks great, doesn't he? I mean, he really still does look great, and it just goes to show that this relationship with Impact and New Japan Pro Wrestling is still incredibly strong. And it was like I was saying the other day, with these stars coming in, whether it is Finjuice, whether it is El Phantasmo, whether it is Kojima, this paves the way for Okada or Naito or someone like that to come in the future. I know people are still rolling their eyes going, it's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. Look, Slammiversary is on the horizon. Who's to say that Okada doesn't come in for one night, just that one night, and faces off against someone? It's a possibility. Now, is he going to face Kenny Omega? Probably not. Probably not. I mean, I think Impact would love to do it, but I think it's probably going to be Moose versus Kenny Omega. So, look, very excited and really exciting to see Kojima next week. I don't know who he's going to face off against. I assume he wins, right? But maybe he sets up something for Against All Odds. If he appears next week on the TV tapings, that means he was on the TV show. That means he was at the TV tapings for the entirety of those 4 days. At least we would think. I know Omega and Callis weren't, but that means he would have been in America or he would have been in Nashville for those 4 days. So if that's the case, that's really exciting because we could see way more of Kojima over the course of the next few weeks on Impact and possibly at Against All Odds as well. And then maybe, who knows, maybe at Slammiversary in July as well. But look, very exciting time to be an Impact Wrestling fan. As always, guys, this is just one man's opinion. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about Impact Wrestling, AEW, New Japan Pro Wrestling, WWE, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved with the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube, go up the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestling News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right-hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video, along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon. Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.